Did the administration just say that somehow the slaughter of cartoonists and journalists had some justification? Joining me now, Tammy Bruce, Fox News political contributor, Richard Grenell, former UN spokesperson, David Sears, former Navy SEAL, and Pete Hegseth, Concerned Vets for America. Pete, I'll start with you. It's beyond the pale in my mind that the wording that he used, I don't know if he was speaking off the cuff or he was trying to make some sort of comparison, but it really sounded like he was not necessarily okay, but he understood Charlie Hebdo.
Yeah, it was sort of the polished version of the Blame America First crowd. There's always a rationale. There's always a subtle justification. Well, the guys at Charlie Hebdo, they kind of had it coming because they were a little too provocative, not quite prepared to just say, hey, this is an evil ideology of radical Islamists seeking to kill anybody they can who write cartoons or are in cafes. You saw it subtly pop up, and it does all the time with this administration. With John Kerry, he can't quite keep it under the surface.
You know, Tammy, this administration seems to have a sort of a sympathetic vein with respect to the slights that are felt. You know, we have already heard that terrorists are this way because of climate change and a lack of opportunity. We never really hear that these savages are simply savages.
Yeah, remember, they're doing it because they need jobs. Look, this is more than making excuses even. This was shocking. It was obscene. He said this in Paris. And he said there was an element about a rationale that you could, as in us, latch on to. In other words, it was understandable. This is a mentality that explains a great deal of the Obama administration's attitude and its approach. It is empathy. There is sympathy for the slaughterers, for the terrorists, right. That there is supposed to be an understanding of why this is occurring. It is John Kerry, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, should resign because of this comment. It is the most remarkable thing I think we've heard. A sitting.
I can tell you right now, this will dominate headlines. You know, Richard Grenell, you were a former UN spokesperson. I think this is a sort of attitude that permeates the halls of the UN, but it's shocking to hear that there would be any attempt to justify what happened at Charlie Hebdo.
Well, first of all, technically I was a spokesman for the U.S. State Department, but you're correct. No, that's okay, because you are correct in that this permeates the State Department. We have a culture at the State Department that inherent in their thinking is that somehow we are to blame for picking a fight with radical Islam. If we would just give them a job, if we would just not pick this fight, if we would just not poke fun at their profit, somehow inherent in that, this liberal mentality has taken over the State Department and the Democratic Party, and they are blaming American. Pete is right. It's that Blame America First crowd. But it goes a little bit further than that. We are responsible for this terrorism because we are picking this fight by putting democracy in front of their form of governing. Sure, and I think that what we need as Democrats to stand up and finally say, our party has gone off the rails, it's too far left, we have to get it back. Bill Clinton could not win the nomination in this Democratic Party right now.
Here's the thing, though, David Sears. You fought, as a Navy SEAL. You understand who the enemy is, and the idea that they would be emboldened, in my mind, by these sort of comments and this sort of sympathetic vein that runs through this administration for their cause.
Right. This explains a lot to me. It tells you that there's a complete and total ignorance of what the enemy is and who the enemy is and what they're trying to accomplish. If we try to lend some sort of rationale to it, we can't understand the enemy's ultimate goals. And what's insulting to the enemy, or their rationale, is our very existence, our value system, our Western way of life. That does not change. And until we come to a realization that that's what they're after, we are never going to win this.
Tammy, this might explain why the administration thought they could say a video sparked Benghazi, that they thought that would be a plausible explanation to the American public that some sort of offensive video was good enough to spark the Benghazi slaughter.
Yeah, that was bad enough when you thought that it was some contrived framework that they were telling us. But now apparently we could argue, and it would be true for the Democrat Party, Obama's administration, that they actually would believe that this is their frame of mind. But what they're doing is justifying, not just blaming us for it, but then justifying the murder of innocent people as a result. That is very different. That is the problem with Kerry's remarks. But the freedom for him to say it in Paris to these people who've just suffered another horrible massacre is shocking, and it tells you the frame of mind. Well, after all, I mean, he speaks French. I guess that's supposed to be enough, right? He should resign. This should show the American people the void of soul of this administration and of the American left and of the left worldwide.
You know, Pete, our foundation of our country is built on the Constitution, and it starts off with freedom of the press. And again, you know, what happened with Charlie Hebdo, satirist, you know, these guys do cartoons, they do political cartoons, anyone's a potential target. It's just really appalling because it feels like this sets up freedom of speech as an easier target now for would-be terrorists and those who hate the West.
Well, I'm not equating what's happening on campus right now to terrorists, but aren't we already seeing that?
Yes,
We're already seeing the First Amendment under assault ideologically. On campuses, it's not through violence. On campuses, it's through intimidation, political, ideological intimidation.
But you're
terrorists
suggesting,
take it to another level.
Both groups of people, however, probably feel that they do have some sympathy in the highest office in the land.
And if the other side accepts the grievance and says, yes, we have to bow down to it, you create, again, not the same thing. But if the administration, if John Kerry has to admit that we're at war with radical Islamists, that creates a whole nother cascading set of effects that this administration is unwilling to engage with.
Today, he effectively said, it's understandable if you want to murder people with whom you disagree. That is what the Secretary of State effectively signaled to terrorists and everyone else. There's a rationale. It's kind of legitimate. You disagree with someone, you're offended, it's understandable. You might want to murder them.
You know, this whole time I'm thinking, too, I wonder where they stand on the attack with the Jewish deli. You know, maybe, you know, it's just something that comes to my mind. They didn't bring that one up. Maybe they're not sure where the peg that one. But, you know, Richard, again, this, to me, is just going to add additional fuel to the fire. We already see an amazing amount of pushback against this administration with their handling of foreign policy, with their handling of ISIS, with the acceptance of Syrian refugees. And I think this is going to make it just that much harder to push through their agenda.
Yeah, I hope so. But I think I want to pick up on a point that Tammy made, which is how awful is it that he's so comfortable, John Kerry is so comfortable to make this argument. There's no pushback at the State Department, within his party, the media in D.C. I think that it's time that people in Washington, D.C. and in New York, reporters and thought leaders begin to say this is unacceptable. This type of language, this type of liberalism gone awry needs to stop. And unless we have people within their own party standing up, we're just going to sound like, oh, conservatives are always disagreeing. This is an ideology that John Kerry slipped out and said today that is really dangerous to democracy and freedom and personal responsibility. And I think that we've got to have people stand up.
And to that point, David, here's the thing. ISIS has been extraordinarily successful in wooing disenfranchised or disillusioned, whatever you want to call them, Westerners, particularly those whose parents may have come from the Middle East or they came to from the Middle East as youngsters. This is the kind of thing they feed on. This is sort of a de facto admission that somehow the West has wronged the people of ISIS and others, and it does give them the green light.
That's right. We do. We need to have a unified narrative. This is terrorism. I wonder what his comments on 9/11 would be. You know, in New York. What are you going to say about that? We need to have a unified narrative that all of this is wrong. We are fighting a global war against terrorists, radical Islam that is against the world. We need to unify, have a unified narrative. There is no rationale that is acceptable for any of their actions.
David, I want to switch gears while I'm with you. France, Russia, both targeting ISIS stronghold in Syria, both coming out saying, hey, we don't want to contain. We don't want this to be just typical retribution. We want this to be the beginning of the end of ISIS. But we need America. Somehow America must participate. If America doesn't want to lead, should we at least follow?
I think we should lead. So we can go back and look at Gulf War I, right? We brought in Syria, Assad's father, who is arguably a worse dictator than he is, and he joined the coalition to take down Saddam Hussein and push him out of Kuwait. So there's no reason we can't compartmentalize, unify against an emergent global enemy that is ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Let's not forget about Al-Qaeda.